And there we go, the Hangout on
And
Air.
we are live. Yes, yes.
So welcome to the Groovy Podcast, wherever you are. My name is Ken Cousin, and I'm podcasting from the area near Baltimore, Maryland this week. And Baruch, where are you?
And hi, Ken. So we just moved to our new office today. So it's our first day in our amazing office, and it's two-store building, and I am on the upper floor.
Wow.
And here you can see some of it, right?
Yeah, it looks
So
gorgeous.
that's how we roll. It is huge and amazing. It's a whole building for us. It says like huge Jeffrey sign on the entrance, and we are super excited. It's like wow.
What city is it in?
Sunnyvale.
Oh, in Sunnyvale.
It's just across the Moffett Field, where the Google self flying planes on or whatever they do there. So yeah, we are nearby.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Fortunately, neither one of us at the moment is in the path of the hurricane coming up the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Florida is getting clobbered. I think this area may or may not even get rain. But I should be home before any of that happens, so put me back in Connecticut. We'll see. But for anyone who is affected by the hurricane coming up from Florida through the Carolinas, well, stay safe. Best wishes. Hope everything works out as well as it possibly can for you.
Agreed.
In the meantime, we'll try to keep you a little bit entertained with news and views from the Groovy ecosystem. So, of course, our biggest piece of news this time, the biggest change, the biggest event that happened is that at long last, it looks like Grails 3.2 is now released.
And it's a huge one. It's a really big one. It could easily be 4.
4? But it is, yes, it's a very big deal. Do you want to comment on anything in it?
Yeah, so completely new GORM. That's I think the big deal.
That's one of them. Yep.
Yeah, with the reactive part, so Args GORM.
Right, which they called, by the way, GORM 6.0 now. And interestingly enough, they actually opened up a separate website just for the manual for GORM 6. So that instead of just going to grails.org and then going to the documentation, this is at gorm.grails.org, and that'll redirect to which looks to be the same GORM documentation we've used all along, except with all the new features from GORM 6 in it. Have you? One thing I want to ask you, by the way, one of the big features of the new GORM 6 is this multi-tenancy mode.
Yes.
Have you done anything with that?
No, I didn't play with it at all, and I just in the release notes and a little bit in documentation, so I have a clue what it is, but didn't get into any details.
Yeah, from what they discussed, because I know that a couple people have looked at that, and it's something that has been requested. It seems to be, again, from the documentation, they claim it's a way to keep multiple clients' data isolated from each other and still use it. And yes. I find that fascinating. I didn't even know that was something that happened a lot. I mean, we've been able to use multiple data sources forever. But this idea of being able to keep separate databases with separate connection pools for each tenant's data, or even just separating by schemas, or even with just a discriminator, that's a remarkable thing. I'd never heard about that.
So I think that was like the requirements is out there. If you're creating a multi-tenant SaaS application, there is always this dilemma on what will be the best way to separate the data, and if it comes from the framework itself, it makes life so much easier.
Yeah, it's really powerful stuff, and that is one of the big features of GORM. And of course, the other new big feature of GORM is the reactive extensions, what they're referring to as RX GORM, based on RX Java for what's the buzzwords would be non-blocking reactive data access code, which at the moment doesn't necessarily work with relational databases because they don't have reactive extensions, but the NoSQL databases like MongoDB, it does work. Now, they also claim they have an implementation for REST as well, which is very interesting. I wonder if that's how a lot of these things are going to be worked with in the future.
Yep. That's the, I would say that's the big deal in GORM 6, the reactive part, and it's very trendy now.
Yeah.
So yeah, good timing as well, and definitely not behind, just in time for all the all the carnival of reactive that is going on down there. Good stuff.
Yeah, on that last edition of the Groovy Podcast, I got a chance to talk to Dan Woods about a lot of the reactive stuff, and the increase in throughput that they're able to get due to a lot of the reactive programming, that has been rather extraordinary. They're able to get a lot more scalability, a lot more volume for a lot fewer processors, and that's really good. And eventually, at some point, the database connectivity stuff will become asynchronous as well, and then we'll see what changes that leads to. But in the meantime, Grails is ready for all that. They have all the RX Java stuff built right in.
Yeah, so if I'm not in error, there is a CFP for async JDBC.
Ah, okay.
From what I know, it's in very, very early stages. They have some POCs that I don't remember the name of the company behind this proposal. They of course have their own interest because they claim that they are more ready than the others, but it's all in very, very early stages. I don't know if Java 10 is even the target version, but as you mentioned, eventually we will have async JDBC, and then it will be really, really dramatic.
And RX GORM, of course, is already working for Mongo, and we'll see where it grows from there. Now, the other major feature of Grails 3.2 appears to be these JSON views, which make it remarkably easy to customize the JSON-based requests and responses associated with RESTful web services. That, too, by the way, has its own dedicated website on that. That's under views.grails.org. And I was looking at that now, and they've got all this information with the JSON View API, with the HAL support, the template engine, static compilation, and so on. Everything all the way through. I noticed, I don't have a link to it in the show notes, but I did notice that Jeff Brown also published a sample related to JSON views as part of the Grails samples. Have you dealt with any of that?
No, I just saw it. Didn't yet play with it in any way, but yeah, it again looks like a very nice addition, and yep. So we'll see how useful it is.
Well, just mention then, just by way of introduction for those who haven't used it, Groovy has had builder classes forever, of course, and they've had markup builder. I think that was one of the first, and then of course they've had a swing builder and an ant builder and all these others. Well, one of the things they introduced a few versions ago was the JSON builder, and then they added on to the markup builder and the JSON builder streaming versions that are better able to handle large amounts of data. This one, the JSON views, will render JSON using Groovy's streaming JSON builder, and that also goes along with the rewrite of the JSON builder and parsing and slurping classes that was done a couple of Groovy versions ago in order to make that far more efficient as well. Then when they render things using XML, they also use the markup template engine, which has been around for quite some time. The only thing I find somewhat amusing about this, or ironic, is that when you write your own view under Grails app views, then they prefer to put the format they use is they end the file extension with .gson, G-S-O-N, so that when you make your own view, the example they use calls it hello.gson, and they have various other ones. To me, of course, and to most people, I suppose, GSON always means Google's JSON processor. That, of course, isn't necessarily implied here, but it's just funny. I assume that they're using it short for Groovy JSON, but it's just ironic that we have the exact same extension that way. Yeah, so at any rate, they're able to use various annotations, like a field annotation. They're able to do content negotiation in the standard mechanism. They use templates the same way Grails has always used templates, by putting an underscore before the name of the file. So you can have an underscore person.json and then use that to render a whole series of person instances through the template, and so on and so on. And when I was looking at the documentation at first, I followed it, but I got a little confused about where all these different pieces went, and it was really nice to also have the demo project out at GitHub to see how everything went together. If I lost you there, you're still available? Well, I will continue on, confident in the fact that Baruch will rejoin. Maybe the new building's got some lag in it, who knows? Or maybe these are unexpected side effects of the hurricane. You can always blame everything on that, right, as we're going. So regarding Grails 3.2, in addition to the addition of the new GORM features in GORM 6 and the Grails views, the JSON views, then they also have made improvements to the REST scaffolding as well as the AngularJS scaffolding. So there is extra information in the user guide on how to use those plugins, or rather I should say profiles, which is a very nice, useful thing, because one of the difficulties that had been associated with profiles in the past was that they were effective, but they lacked some documentation, and that's clearly coming around. That's going to be a lot better. Another thing, and this is related to Grails in general, is that they have finished a port, and now the user guide itself is backed by ASCII Doctor. And ASCII Doctor, of course, is a very popular mechanism. I've used ASCII Doctor for all of my training materials for a while now. O'Reilly books are written using ASCII Doc, among other technologies. It's become a very popular way to write HTML-based or PDF-based documentation, as I think they have bindings for other types as well, being able to generate EPUB or MOBI documentation as well. At any rate, Grails documentation, of course, predated the move to ASCII Doc and ASCII Doctor. They preferred to use something that I believe they called GDoc. It was something much older, and now they've written scripts to port everything over to the new ASCII Doctor back end. And that means that in addition to having ASCII Doc available, it's also very easy to make modifications to the documentation. I think they even have a link that allows you to do that directly. Pardon me. When you see improvements that should be made to the documentation, you have an opportunity to do that immediately. And that, of course, will encourage additional contributors to get a chance to get involved and to help out on some of that stuff. At the moment, I'm still seeing Baruch, but I'm not hearing anything from him. So I'm going to plunge blindly onward, and hopefully he'll be able to kick in when the opportunity arises. We also have our normal list in the show notes, which are hosted at GitHub, link in the documentation, to whatever else is new as well. And another release that came out relatively recently, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, but since our last news-based podcast, was the release of Gradle 3.1. Now, this followed rather quickly on the release of Gradle 3.0, and 3.1 now has a big emphasis on the multi-project build feature, the so-called composite builds. So this the scenario that's now available is that the projects can be in different directories. I mean, prior to multi-project capabilities, then by being in subdirectories of each other with a settings.gradle file that identified which subdirectories were themselves Gradle projects. Now you can have your projects in different locations and use this composite build mechanism to incorporate them wherever they may be. And this is a big, big improvement. This is going to be very helpful for many people in the future. So right now they claim that there's more work to be done on this in the release notes, but it's definitely a promising feature for the future. So they have done a lot of that. We have incremental builds as well as a similar feature that improves the release and the control you have over the up-to-date checks. And in general, the rest of the improvements have been performance improvements for faster dependency resolution. And they're claiming that Android users especially could see a huge improvement in performance, as much as a 50% reduction in configuration and sync time for Android Studio. If anyone is using Gradle and Android Studio, or if anyone is working with Android-related projects, it'd be interesting to hear your experience on that. I'm sure they'd love to hear it on the Gradle forums as well. They also have made it so that you can cancel the builds when using the daemon. Just using a Control-C does in fact cancel the build, but no longer terminates the daemon itself, which is interesting. And when you combine this with the fact that one of the biggest innovations in Gradle 3 is that the daemon is on by default, this should help the development process a lot. So that's a very useful capability, and manages not to remove you from the system when you have to cancel a build for some reason, and then have to remember to start the daemon as well. I should mention, even though I don't necessarily want to, that of course the other thing in Gradle 3.1 is that now they have limited support for both the Play framework and for the dreaded Kotlin language. Kotlin build script support is getting more fully featured syntax for declaring dependencies and faster code completion. I only hesitate to mention it because it's apparently impossible to mention Kotlin support in Gradle without that becoming a rather controversial and talk-inducing topic. So I'll just mention it and move on. I know the plan has always been to have full Kotlin support within Gradle scripts by the end of this year. It sounds like they're making considerable progress on that goal, and they may, who knows, they may actually make that and may have to have full Kotlin support in the coming year, and inevitably IntelliJ will add support for that within the IDE as well. So at any rate, we have a link to the release notes in the show notes for Gradle 3.1. Feel free to take care of it. Of course, as usual, it is now available under SDK Manager. So you can just do an SDK install Gradle and get the latest version and start trying it right out of the box. I haven't tried any of the new features, but I have satisfied myself that I could run all my old builds with Gradle 3.1 without any kind of a problem there. Everything has been working fine. Now, next on our list, I want to mention that Ratpack has a 1.4.2 release. That is an incremental release, if you will. The idea is that that's largely a patch that fixes several issues with the HTTP client and so-called server-sent events. You can take a look at the actual result, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of them. They did upgrade to Netty 4.1.5 final, and there's a few other issues mentioned in the release notes. I do get the feeling that Ratpack is starting to get more and more attention within the industry, and that's got to be a good thing. The 1.4.2 release being actually fairly quiet is a nice thing. It means that the product is becoming more and more stable, and hopefully you will find that interesting and useful in the future. Moving on releases, one interesting release that has just been announced recently is that Jeb, the browser automation tool that is really nice, now has a 1.0 release candidate version. This is a major jump because for seemingly years, Jeb has been in the 0.13 chain, and now they have created a release candidate that's ready to go. Now, they claim that the differences between the 1.0 release candidate 1 version and the 0.13 version is not really all that dramatic. It's mostly bug fixes and improvements, but they are claiming that now the product is stable enough and go ahead and use it. Now, I have to say, I have used it for quite some time off and on. I'm not really a great front-end person, and therefore I don't have a lot of experience writing tests for front-end code, but I have used Jeb in the 0.13 chain for a long time, and I've never had a problem with it. My problems have generally been related to browser drivers and things like that. And there are discussions of those issues in the book of Jeb, good old jebish.org, gebish.org. And the announcement was made on the Jeb user mailing list, which is, believe it or not, still hosted at a Google group. So we have a link in the show notes to the Google Groups message where that was posted. And if you have questions or issues with Jeb, then the Jeb user mailing list, which is in fact hosted as part of this Google group, is a good place to find answers. I do believe that Jeb may also, well, let me not make an assumption here, but I thought they may also have a Slack channel as well. But a lot of the people involved in Jeb are involved in many other Groovy-related projects. So it's a nice place to take a look as well if you have any questions. There are also, as a reminder, and I've mentioned this on a couple of the earlier podcasts, there are presentations that have been made at some of the earlier GreatConf issues. The GreatConf, specifically in the US and in Minneapolis last year, there were multiple presentations on Jeb, and they tend to be very high quality. Craig Atkinson is a real expert there, and he's done some both basic and advanced presentations on Jeb. For those few people who are listening who may not be aware of Jeb at all, let me simply introduce it by saying that Jeb is a Groovy DSL that is a front end on the old Selenium API, or nowadays WebDriver. So it allows you to automate your browser, any browser, using these drivers inside it. So if you have any experience with Selenium or WebDriver, then this Jeb makes that whole process much easier. Also introduces a page model in order to make your browser automation much more robust. You're able to define regions on pages and use them interactively. I also am sure this will be an interesting topic of discussion in the upcoming G3 Summit near the end of this year. One API that we have unfortunately not spent a lot of time talking about, which fortunately now we get a chance to, is that Griffon released its 2.8.0 release at the end of September. On 29 September, they released version 2.8. Griffon is the tool of choice for building desktop Groovy, or even arguably desktop Java applications. It started off years and years ago as a fork of the Grails API, without the GORM features and things like that, mostly just taking advantage of the nice model view controller separation and going from there. By now, it's a quite powerful, mature product that does have that MVC capability within it. It's heavily annotation-based with that MVC members, and they have plugins for a variety of view layers, including FXML and several others. Groovy FX, I know, is involved in there as well. And they're currently upgrading to use Gradle 3.1 and everything. So if you are a desktop Java or a desktop Groovy developer, it's good to know that Griffon is still a very active project, still making considerable improvements, and still available. And of course, I am forced to admit that they also support Kotlin as well. But I suppose everybody will eventually. So
well, that's...
you're back. Hi.
Yeah, sorry about that. My computer crashed. But of course, for Kotlin, who, if not you, can highlight the Kotlin support in Griffon, of course.
And you see yet another reason why I'm always reluctant to bring this up, but I do feel obligated. So I know Andres will be happy. I was kind of giving Andres a bit of a hard time at Java 1, just mentioning, so is Griffon still active? Is anything going on there? And he just gave me the heavy sigh. I knew that obviously he's been working very hard on that for a long time. So
yeah,
it's good. 2.8 release available.
And I think it has to do a lot with the Canoe investment in JavaFX. They are very big supporters of this project, and of course, it's only natural that Griffon supports JavaFX and makes actually JavaFX better in that way that we can have the Groovy DSL on top of it and work with it.
It's definitely on my list of things to dig into. I mean, because it seems like it's so much better. You know, it's such an improvement over what we used to have. And I just haven't had that many opportunities to do anything desktop related, but I'm definitely going to have to find time to do that. While your computer was doing whatever it was doing, I went through the releases on Gradle 3.1 and some of the others. I know that part of your talks at Java 1 related to the multi-configuration, or pardon me, the multi-project builds, the, what do we call it?
Modular, not modular build.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just said it. All right, I'll look it up again real quick. Any rate, composite builds. That's what I'm looking for.
Yes, composite builds. Yes.
Since you got a chance to play with that, do you have anything you wanted to comment on about it?
Yeah, so it's very simple feature in terms of how you use it and the concept, but it's a very powerful one. It's the ability to run a couple of builds tied together and actually provide the outputs of the previous builds as dependencies for the former builds without actually needing to build or install or deploy any artifact and then depend on that. And by that, of course, simplifying a lot stuff like development of the plugins, for example. So you can have now a Gradle plugin as a separate project, and then just make sure that it's built and up to date before every build that actually uses it. And that's exactly the use case that I showed in my talk in Java 1, comparing that, of course, to the old way or to the Maven way, when you have to build an artifact, a jar file out of your plugin, install it in your local cache, and then be dependent on this artifact. Now you don't need that. You can have those projects tied together, but still keep them separate as two different projects.
That, when you combine that with the build scans now, of course, that they make available, I think you're seeing Gradle is really starting to separate itself from any other possible build tool around, not only in the features that they provide, but in the rapid pace of innovation and the support they're able to provide around it. So that's really good to see. The other thing I mentioned while your machine was rebooting was just the Ratpack 1.4.2 release that is mostly just an incremental bug fix release on Ratpack, but it's still just showing how stable it is. And then I pointed to the JEB 1.0 release candidate coming out. Did you have anything you wanted to throw in about those, or you're happy?
Well, yeah, no, that's I'm sure you covered both of them. I heard most of your JEB and Griffon news updates, and they are just fine. There are a couple of topics that we have left. Of course, the Tayobi index, the one that everyone so loved to declare as wrong and not not objective, but eventually everybody have to mention, especially if your language of choice is going up. So I guess we are pretty happy with the Tayobi index this month. Groovy is up to the 16th place, and it's been in the 20s for more than half a year, I guess, already, and not showing any signs that it is expected to get out of the 20. And that's, of course, a great place to be.
Yeah, when I was back in the day when I did engineering and research and things like that, we used to say that there's an old cliche that I don't remember where it comes from, very old one, used to say that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And the Tayobi index is a deeply flawed measure of popularity of programming languages, and I've seen many articles about how impossible it is to break into the top 10, and you're measuring a very weak signal and all kinds of stuff like that. But honestly, I'd rather be in it than not in it. I'd rather it be showing that there is a level of adoption going on rather than not doing so. And Groovy does seem to have entered a region where it's relatively stable in the index in the lower 20s or the lower teens, upper 20s. So that's very helpful.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to your topic that you had a couple of keynotes about, the perception of Groovy versus the reality. And Tayobi index is what helps the perception, and we don't know, we don't need it, but other people, those who see now Groovy as a kind of weak spot because of all the reasons that we all know, this is something that actually helps the perception.
Yeah, and probably partly what led to some of this as well is the move to becoming an Apache project.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure that's a very big deal.
On an unrelated topic, just to bring it up, did you notice that NetBeans is now an Apache incubator project?
Yes, it happened couple of weeks ago, I guess.
Yeah.
Java 1. It was an announcement of Java 1.
Yeah, they had
And
a whole thing on it, and I don't know how to interpret that. I mean, I still see very, very few people who are actually using it, but the ones who are using it seem to be very happy with it. Is this Oracle's way of saying that they're not interested in supporting anymore, or are they still going to be funding the people who are working on it?
well, I think there are two ways to look at it. First is yes, we are stop sponsoring and go to Apache and make your own living. But the other is it's a community project, open source, free. It's always have been. We want to make it a more independent, less branded as Oracle, and that's of course a good thing.
Yeah, so I mean, I've always kind of considered the NetBeans group as a small but very vocal community. They don't like to be overlooked, but they also don't really have that much in the way of market share. But now that the Eclipse is kind of getting old and creaky in a lot of ways, NetBeans may eventually become the open source alternative if your company is not willing to spend the money on an IntelliJ license.
Well, IntelliJ Community Edition is also very powerful, and it's open source, so that will be your other option. But the more the merrier. Of course, having competition is good, and kind of decline of Eclipse that we see is worrying. So having another IDE stepping up to give a fight to IntelliJ, it's a good thing.
Yeah, and they've had Groovy support since, I think it was like 6.5 or something. So they've had it for years and years now. So that's helpful. Now, of course, speaking of Groovy-related people that are spending their time working on the language itself, I found it fascinating that OCI, who eventually apparently is going to employ everybody in the Groovy community, recently hired Paul King. So Paul King, my personal hero and Groovy committer extraordinaire, is now going to be working on Groovy for OCI when they're focusing on Grails.
If I'm not in error, Paul King have the most contributions to Groovy programming language.
That I think he was for a while, and then Cedric Champeau passed him, but Cedric was funded to do that. And now Cedric is doing other things in addition to Groovy, so Paul may either reclaim the title, or I think it'll come down to whether he wants it or not. But either way, those two are both just outstanding and have done extraordinary works for the Groovy community.
Yeah, and knowing that Paul King is going now to be on salary for improving Groovy are great news. And again, going back to the perception, here you go. We now have again a team of great engineers that work on the language and a full-time job. So yeah, those are great news both on the technical side and on the perception side as well.
I'm really looking forward to talking to Paul and finding out what his plans are, because not just his, but the Groovy core team itself, what they're hoping to do, especially now that he's going to have a job to do that. I don't know when I'll get a chance to talk to him directly, but I do know I'll see him at the G3 Summit. So the G3 Summit, just as a reminder, is in Fort Lauderdale at the end of November 28th through December 1st. Hosted by the same No Fluff Just Stuff people who have our nice little webpage as well. And Paul King is, I believe, scheduled to give talks there. So he'll make it all the way from Oz, and we'll get a chance to talk to him. And if we do a live Groovy podcast from there, we definitely have to make sure that he's involved.
Yes, absolutely. We will be, first of all, we will record a live podcast, and of course, Paul King will be involved. So it's yes and yes on both of them.
Yep. Now, there's one other thing that was in our show notes that I should, by the way, something I didn't put in. that was in the Grails Diary this week. Again, we should mention that the Grails Diary is just a phenomenal resource for keeping up with what's going on in not just the Grails world, but the Groovy world as well. They did mention that Groove CSS was released. This based on GrooveScript, a mechanism for converting strings and working with CSS. I have not done anything on the GrooveScript side. As I say, I'm not really a front-end person, but I figured at least I ought to mention it. It was in the Grails Diary, so it was worth mentioning here as well. So then and then the final thing that we have in the show notes that is worth talking about. Again, I'm not sure what to say about it. There is a Grails 3 book that is at least planned. Eric, I'm assuming it's Helgeson, or I don't really know how to pronounce it, Helgeson. If he wants us to correct that, please send a note or Twitter at Groovy Podcast. We have our Twitter account. At any rate, he's got a book that's planned called Practical Grails 3. And right now, there's a website where you can put your email address in and then get notified when it is available. I remember when he mentioned it, there was a lot of discussion about how far along it was. He claimed that it was very much on the way to being written. I guess we'll see. So we'll definitely talk more about that when the book is released. But there will be sections in there on not only just basic Grails, but on the REST APIs, on reactive Grails, on building and deploying, and so on. So it sounds very promising. Pardon?
Yeah. I mean, of course, all those have to be there in this book. If it's a book of Grails 3, it should include the reactive part and everything else. So yeah, definitely looking forward.
Yeah, there's a link to a GitLab repo, but I don't have a GitLab account, and apparently you need one in order to get in there, so I haven't really looked at it. I don't tend to dig too much into books before they're released anyway, but I am looking forward to seeing that. I believe it's just going to be an ebook, and we'll see how that goes. So we certainly wish him the best of luck and hope that there's a lot of progress on this.
Absolutely.
In terms of conferences, we should mention, I think the call for proposals for papers is still available for Great Conf in India, which will be in New Delhi in January.
And I think also Europe at least. I don't know about US, but Great Conf Europe summer next year, already have the CFP open. So
right.
That's right. So submit early, submit often. And
Yeah, and again, just generally, we want to thank No Fluff Just Stuff for the website hosting and also the opportunity to give Groovy-related talks on the tour there. The Grails Diary, I already mentioned, is a great source of information, and Groovy Calamari is I believe, their 50th issue or something like that. Sergio Del Amo does a lot of work with Groovy Calamari. I think his latest edition was focused entirely on the GORM 6 changes. And good, he always has some focus to the issues, and they point to links where people have spent a lot of time working out the details. So that's very helpful also. Anything else you wanted to mention? Where are you going to be next?
No, so I'm off now to the airport in a couple of minutes, just packing and leaving to DevOps Days Boise. Next week, I have two great conferences, one in Russia, the other is in Ukraine. I will see Andres in St. Petersburg, and I'll see a bunch of Sprint guys, Jochen and all the team in Kiev. We're going to do the Groovy Puzzlers in St. Petersburg, and it will be a lot of fun.
Well, that's, I mean, I travel a lot, but you probably traverse triple the miles I do. I'm going to, I've got some No Fluff conferences in Chicago coming up next week, and then in Seattle in 2 weeks, and briefly in Minneapolis as well. In between, also, there's the Connect Tech conference. That's front-end stuff. I'm going to be doing some Android stuff there in Atlanta.
Nice.
And No Fluff in Reston, Virginia as well. This is a busy time on the No Fluff tour. There's like 5 or 6 weeks in a row practically, ending in Denver, I believe, in the middle of November. And then, of course, that leads to the G3 Summit down in Fort Lauderdale, followed by the Rich Web Experience as well. So I've got those various things going on in addition to regular stuff. Also, hopefully, planning to do some recordings again relatively soon. In the meantime, hope to run into you again, and we'll see if we can plan another podcast when we can get all the machines working at the same time.
Yeah, so I believe that next time we'll have some time to record something. Will be beginning of November. It's like probably 3 weeks from now. We'll try to pull it off, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable plan, and unless something, of course, comes up, and then we'll see. I do really enjoy doing some of the interviews too. So if I get a chance to talk to somebody, I'll just add another special edition where we'll get a chance to. Rather than have a newsy podcast, we'll do that case one.
Yep. Yeah, you should. They are just great.
Oh, they're a lot of fun.
All right. Okay. Saying that, I have to run to the airport. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and see you all soon.
Oh, and you too. And hopefully this will be available later tonight on iTunes and whatever your podcast tool of choice is. Thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.